We are recording the interview of Alex Cwiekalo. This interview is being conducted by David Berry from the Wright State University Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University's new media incubator in Dayton, Ohio. It is 9 a.m. on February 21st, 2017. So Alex, where and when were you born?
I was born in April 1947 in Rahway, New Jersey.
And who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My parents, my mother was Irene Schweiner Cwiekalo of Hungarian descent. She's a second generation, spoke Hungarian, the family spoke Hungarian. My father, Alex Cwiekalo Sr., was Ukrainian. He was born in Brooklyn, so he was a first generation. His parents came over from the Ukraine, which is my surname's Ukrainian. I have one sister, Arlene. She still lives in New Jersey. I graduated from John F. Kennedy Memorial High School in 1965. Was the first graduating class of that high school.
Were you the only member of your family to join the military?
Yes, of that family, yes.
And then, what were you doing before you went into the military?
For the first year after I graduated, I went to Roberts Walsh Stenotype School. I was planning to become a stenotype court reporter. Of course, in 1965 and 1966, that was pretty much the height of the Vietnam War, and the draft was still in existence then, so I had two draft notices and physicals, and I pretty much knew that I was going to get drafted because I wasn't going to get any exemption for going to a business school. So my buddy and I went to the recruiters, talked to the recruiters, and we both were going to go into the Navy, but the Navy didn't have any kind of way to get us in within the next 6 months to a year, which meant we would get drafted. My buddy took a chance and joined the Navy, but I walked across the hall and talked to the Air Force recruiter, and the Air Force had what they call the lay enlistment program, where you can get sworn into the reserves and you were part of the Air Force, which made you no longer susceptible to the draft. So that's how I joined the Air Force. Didn't plan on making it a career, but 29 years, 6 months, and 18 days later, I finished my Air Force career in 1995, and it was a wild ride and a great time.
So, kind of walk me through kind of your mindset of how did you go from wanting to be a courtroom reporter to joining the Air Force? I know you said the draft was a factor. Was there anything else that kind of swayed you to go to the Air Force?
Absolutely not. That was the only reason I probably would have never gone into the military any other way.
So if the draft wasn't involved, you would have stayed at school and
well, I would have hopefully become a court reporter, had my own business, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but that would have changed my whole life.
Oh, yeah.
Would have never met my wife, would have never had my family.
Did you meet your wife while you were in the service?
When I went on active duty at that time, everybody in the Air Force, everybody goes to San Antonio, to Lackland Air Force Base for their basic training. So there was a cadre of us from New York and New Jersey that were at the Newark Airport getting ready to get on a plane to go to Lackland. When they pulled us off, because Lackland was closed, they had spinal meningitis break out there, and they sent us to Amarillo Air Force Base, which is out in the panhandle of Texas someplace. And that was a base that they took us to do basic training, and they had no setup for it. We actually were the first ones, so we spent the first week or two opening up the barracks and dormitories that had already been shut down to start the basic training course. So I went through my basic training at, like I say, at Amarillo Air Force Base, and it was a real adventure. And as luck would have it, after I completed my basic training, I was selected for my career field to be well, at that time they called them administrative specialists. And the technical school was right there in Amarillo, so when I was finished with basic, I packed up my bags and walked from one end of the base to the other end of the base to go to tech school. Went through the class, because I was going to stenotype reporting school. I knew how to type. So that was the biggest thing when we becoming an administrative specialist, is the typing. Most of the fellows that were in the class with me didn't have any typing skills. So I went through the class in 10 days because I didn't need to learn how to type. I just needed to learn all the other things. And I sat around there for 2-3 weeks waiting for an assignment to where I was going to go for my first duty assignment. And that was Plattsburgh Air Force Base, New York, up on the Canadian border, Lake Champlain. So I spent from 1966 to 1968 there. But while I was there, I was able to apply for stenographic training because in the Air Force, there was no way to get directly into the stenographic career field. You had to be in the Air Force and then apply for it later on. So I applied for it. I got selected. I was sent to Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis for 16 weeks at the Army Adjutant General School. So there was a class of Air Force people there on the Army base, and we had our own little outfit. There was like about 20 of us when we started. And again, I was the same thing. I knew how to type, so I didn't have to learn how to type at the stenographic school. But even though the class required you to be able to take shorthand notes at 90 words per minute, on my stenotype machine, I could take it 150 words per minute. But the military regulations said you had to take written shorthand to pass the course. And they wouldn't waiver it, they wouldn't make an exception for it. So I spent my 16 weeks just learning how to take written shorthand, passed the course. And when I was done and went back into the Air Force, I never used that written shorthand again. I used my stenotype machine. But I met my wife there. She was, the class was half and half. It was people that had been in the military already, so I was in for 2 years at that time. My wife and another group of people out of basic training, just out of basic training, were coming straight there. So we had, I'd say about maybe and at that time, the Air Force pretty much separated. You know, the military was, you had your WAFs, women in the Air Force, and you had your Air Force. So the women had their own squadron, they had their own dormitories, everything was separated back then. And like I said, I met her, we spent 16 weeks. After 14 weeks there, when we left, we got engaged. She was from California, originally from Hawaii. I got an assignment to go to Naples, Italy, and she got an assignment to go to Wiesbaden, Germany. So we had planned to spend a year there and then get married, but my family being in New Jersey and her family being in California and her family being Hawaiian, and I was actually considered an outsider by them, believe it or not. But I was in Italy and she was in Germany, and we just said, well, you know, neither one said, my family said, if you get married, we're not coming. If in New Jersey, the California family wasn't going to come. We got married in California, New Jersey family was going to come. So we said, okay, well, let's just get married while we're overseas and let the both of us be mad at us. So we wound up getting married in Naples, Italy in 1968. I spent about 6 more months there because I couldn't get reassigned. She couldn't get reassigned to Italy, which is where we wanted to go. So after her application got approved up the channel, they said, well, have me apply for Germany, and I replied. So 6 months goes by processing paperwork, and I got assigned to Germany. And then we were fully married and lived together and everything from that point on.
So a lot of unique problems with both of you being in the military.
Unique that people don't even understand today.
How did you make that work, being your wife in Italy and you in Germany?
Well, we were young. My wife was 19 and I was 21. So it was an adventure. I mean, it really turned out to be, it started our lives together and what our families grew into after that. You know, we lived on the economy in Wiesbaden in an apartment within the city. Our landlord was German. You know, we weren't eligible for base housing because our rank was so young, and because we were, I don't know. It wasn't that it was against military families being married, but it wasn't a very positive thing back then either, especially when it came to getting assigned together. You know, nowadays it's pretty easy to get unless you're in 2 different services, but back then it was almost impossible to get assigned together. But we were in the same career field, so that helped because she was a stenographer and I was a stenographer, so that did help us in the assignment adventures. But on the other side, the career field was very small. But anyway, my wife got pregnant in 1971, and at that time in the military, when the female got pregnant, she had no choice to stay in. She had to get out. So she separated, you know, a few months before our son was born, and that was our first one. He was born there in Germany, and she left the military. So then I became the de facto sponsor of the family because she wasn't able to be in the military, even though she wanted to stay in the military. And, a lot of that was going on back then, too. We stayed in Germany until 1972. Got an assignment. We got caught up in one of the first financial issues that the Department of Defense was having, where everybody was on 3-year tours overseas, but they extended everybody by 1 year to save money for having to move people back and forth. So everybody that was overseas at that time pretty much got a 12-month extension on their tour. So we stayed there until 1972, and at that time I got an assignment and we went to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. And I was there for almost 4 years. And we had our second and third child there in Nebraska, our 2 daughters. So when we left Nebraska, we had 3 children. I was a Staff Sergeant E5, went back to Naples. I finally got a Naples assignment for the family to come with me. So we went and spent 3 years in Naples, had our 4th child there, and that was a 3-year tour. When we finished that assignment, I had assignment to go back to the States, to Bergstrom Air Force Base in Texas, again, because I said that at that time, the stenographic career field was very small. I was a tech sergeant then, which was an E6, and there was 12 of me in the whole Air Force. So when one of us got an assignment, that would, of course, move everybody else along the spoke wheel. But the stenographic assignments were pretty much at a command staff level. So, but before I got ready to pack out, they said, there's a job up in Belgium at the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, which was NATO, that they're looking for a stenographer for a new position. Would you be interested? I said, sure, why not? I was already in Europe. So they interviewed me for the position, and I was supposed to go work for a 4-star German general who was going to be the deputy SACEUR as a brand new position. So we packed up. We drove from Naples, Italy to Belgium. It was like a 3-day tour because there was no expressways and everything back there in 1975. With 4 little kids in a Volvo station wagon, spending nights in bed and breakfast places in Switzerland and Germany. And when I got to Belgium, they told me that, after looking at your records, they decided that instead of you going to work for the German general, you're going to go work for the SACEUR himself, which at that time was General Alexander Haig. And I worked for him for a year, and then he was replaced. Of course, this was back during the presidential campaign with Reagan. They were good friends. There was I talked to a lot of pretty important people on the telephone while I was working for General Haig that one year, and you never know who was going to be on the other end. I would get calls on Saturday mornings that, hi, this is Ron, and I talked to Al, and it was, Reagan. So that pretty much started my command staff career. It was really challenging, really interesting. I got to interact with a whole bunch of different people from all the services and all the international countries. After that assignment from Belgium, I came. Hopefully I was going to go to Hawaii because my wife wanted to go there, but I wanted to go back to the Air Force. I had been in NATO for so long now, and I wanted to get what I called the real Air Force. So the general had written an email to the general in Hawaii asking if they, could find an assignment for me. Again, realizing that I was now a Master Sergeant Select, I believe, at that time. And so going down from 12 of me in the whole Air Force, there was maybe 6 or 7 of me right now. Well, they said, the message came back saying, sure, we found the job for him in Hawaii. We'll be glad to have him. Just, he'll have to take an extended long tour, which means instead of volunteering for 3 years, I'd volunteer for 3 years plus 1 for 4. But, okay, who's going to not take an extra year in Hawaii, right? But little did I know, and I didn't read the fine print in the message that they sent back to the general, it wasn't an Air Force job. It was another joint job at United States Pacific Command, which was again, a joint command, had nothing to do with the Air Force. So instead of being at Hickam Air Force Base where I thought I was going to be, I was up on top of a hill looking down at Hickam Air Force Base every day when I went to work. And I had, it was a great tour there. I made my next 2 ranks there, E7 and E8, so I was an E8 selectee when I left there. and that was in 1981.
What would you say would be the biggest difference in between working at a normal Air Force base versus working at one of these Joint Command centers?
Well, going on, to answer that question, I'll answer that basically right now, but if we get on to the rest of my assignments, when I did get back into the Air Force, eventually.
Okay.
But working at the Joint Command, it's kind of like, it's not like we're elite people or anything like that, but each service is going to send their best people to those assignments. They're not going to send just anybody to them. So they go through a selection process, and security clearances have a lot to do with that too. I got a security clearance in 1972 when I was at Offutt that flagged me forever after that, because it put a prefix in front of my career field that said, this guy has this clearance and access. So that had a lot to do with the rest of my assignments going on also. But again, in the Air Force, when you go, if you go to an Air Force base and an Air Force installation and you're doing an Air Force job, it's all Air Force people, and you interact with all levels of people as far as education, background, experience, and things like that. But it's all Air Force. All Air Force regulations, all Air Force instructions. Where on the other end, you're having to deal not just with you have to deal with an international community when you're working in NATO or in the joint assignments.
Was that a greater challenge for you?
Absolutely, and had a lot better payback too. At this point, you might imagine or surmise we liked to travel. I mean, we were a 3-year and let's go to the next assignment type of a family at that point. The kids were getting bigger. When we left Hawaii in 80, I said I was there 81 to 85. Yeah, so our oldest was just in junior high school at that time. So. And it was an interesting experience. Like I said, my wife is from Hawaii. We went back there mainly because she wanted to see her grandmother, who she hadn't seen in 20 years. So it was, she got to, see some of her family again for the first time, and I got to be better liked by my in-laws because I was in Hawaii. They could come visit us now.
Not so much an outsider.
So exactly, and I went from like an outsider to one of the favorites after that.
Sorry, you were kind of going on a roll there, and I interrupted.
No problem. About?
I think we left off with
when I'm leaving Hawaii.
Yeah.
Okay, and I did a lot of good stuff when I was there. I started to do, because again, having 4 kids, my wife did have part-time jobs here and there. But a lot of people in the military, even today, to make extra money and stuff like that, they're baggers at the commissary and they work for tips. Well, I wasn't that kind of a guy, so I got into sports officiating, and I became a softball, baseball umpire, and a basketball official. And especially the time that I was overseas, I got a lot of international certifications and everything like that. I know I'm going back a little bit, but in Belgium, when I was in the 3 years I was in Belgium, I really got into the basketball, international sports officiating for basketball. Did some basketball games with some of the Canadian Olympic basketball officials, so it was really a good experience. Learned me a lot. And I continued on. Again, that was my part-time job, and I was making pretty good money. I was able to travel. My wife became a scorekeeper, so she came to the games with me. The kids were there, and they had a place to run around. They weren't starting their sports careers or anything like that yet. So when we were getting ready to leave Hawaii, again, I had an assignment to go to Colorado Springs, which is where I wanted to go. But then they say, well, we don't have a job for you at Colorado Springs. And now I wasn't a stenographer anymore. I was a manager because I was at a higher rank. So I was a supervisor manager. And that opened me up for a lot more places to get assigned now. Now I wasn't unlimited like I was before. So they said, well, we're going to send you to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And again, because of my security clearance, they had this security clearance, and they had this, base jobs over at Wright-Pat that have these special security requirements. So I wound up going to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They said, well, just go there for 3 years and we'll get you to Colorado Springs. Well, 10 years later, I was still at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. But in the interim, it wasn't like I just stayed there at Wright-Patterson. I did a lot of my officiating, but now my kids were getting to be a little bit older. My son was playing sports. My 2 daughters were playing varsity basketball and softball, so I had to stop officiating because to watch them play, I couldn't officiate their games. So I just stopped officiating. But I had officiated for about 21, 22 years at that time, and was having a good time doing it and everything. But you know, the kids were getting older now. While I was at Wright Pat, I went to Saudi Arabia between the two desert wars. In September to December '91, I was there. That was called Southern Watch. So I was at Riyadh Air Base, right in Saudi. We lived in a village that the Saudis had built for some of the nomad tribes that were there, but they wouldn't live there because it was too high level for them. You know, they couldn't bring their camels and all that other good stuff. But this village was like a retirement village in America. That's how nice it was. Villas, I mean, hot water, refrigerators, and everything. And I lived at Escon Village, and we worked at Riyadh Air Base, which was 20 miles away. So I had 3 people working for me. I was the commander of the information management flight, which was mainly processing the mail and all the official and personal mail that was coming in and out of the area for the servicemen that were stationed there. And everybody was rotating on a 90-day basis. So, you know, you would just get up to speed and the next shift was coming back in. We had and again, this was in '91, between the 2 wars. Where we lived and where we worked, the Army Patriot batteries were surrounded us. So we had Army living in the area also, but they were, you know, a world unto their own, just as the Army usually is. But they were there to protect us, and we were sure glad to have them. It was a very opening experience to me because I had one female working for me, and because of the religious and all that other stuff there, when we would in process for our 90-day tour, everybody would get an orientation. And then when we were done, they would have the females stay behind to get their orientation. And that's what they would issue them their burqas, tell them what they could do and couldn't do. And basically, they couldn't do anything except on the base. So I had a female working for me out of 3 people, and part of the thing was having to drive the mail truck around. She could not drive the mail truck off base. She could drive it anywhere on base, but she couldn't drive it off base. So de facto, I went from 3 people working for me to 2 people working for me because of that. And that was, you know, the military was sending women there because, you know, that's what we believe, and that's what but that's the compromises you have to make, I guess. So that was kind of interesting. And anytime they would go downtown, we would make sure, and that was how they were briefed, you never go downtown by yourself. You make sure that you have a male with you, at least one male. So, of course, the 4 of us kind of lived together. That's 90 days that we were there, although people went in and out, and they changed a group of 3 for me while I was there. But we would make sure that we would take her with us whenever we went downtown. And that was, to think some of the places I went when I was there now, I'm going, man, I was really taking my life in my own hands.
I mean, you've been all over the place, Italy, Germany, Belgium, Hawaii. When you got to Saudi Arabia, was it pretty easy for you to adjust to that, to the climate, the culture, since you've been?
Well, thankfully I was there in September to December, and that was more or less, not their winter, but it was the cooling down season. So it was under 100 when I was there, but it was still up in the high 90s, and the humidity and I mean the sandstorms that would come up, and all of the refineries from the war were still burning. So I mean the smoke was still around. You could still smell all the oil that was burning from the first war, when the Rockies were burning the oil towers and everything like that. An interesting thing is that as long as I was driving my military vehicle, which is all I had to drive, I just pull up to any gas station and fill up. They don't pay for gas over there. They just fill up when they need it. So that was pretty nice, especially because you only get 10 miles a gallon in that dang Chevrolet truck that I was driving. But it was, compared to my time in Europe, it was different, but I never got to interact with the people and the cultures like I did in my other assignments, because it was pretty, you know, we were trying to protect our people. We were in a good area in Riyadh and Escon Village, but the people that were out in Al-Kharj, and that was out in the middle of the desert, that's where all the staging was done. So at the end of the first desert storm, all of the vehicles that were left there were left out at Al-Kharj, and it was like a 3 to 4 hour drive to get out there, because I went out there one day with the chaplain just to see it, just to see what El-Karj was, and to meet some of the other people that I only talked to on the phone. And like I say, this was in the middle of the country of Saudi Arabia, and there was a checkpoint in the middle of the country that it was like going from one border to another border, but you were still in the same country. It was you had to stop, you had to show identification, et cetera, and go on and everything like that. And so that was, and I interacted a little bit in the community because of my position. I was responsible for all the copier and fax machines that we were using, so I had to interact with the civilian Saudis that were, running the companies that we were renting the equipment from. So I used to get to go meet with them maybe once every other week just to go over the contract and the payment schedule and everything like that. So I would get to go sit and drink tea with them and all that other good stuff.
Did they ever get you, or did you try some of the local food while you were there?
Absolutely. But we had the dining facility there, and overseas, it's not like it was back in World War II in Vietnam. It's not a mess tent or anything like that. It's a big operation, and back then it was a 24-hour operation. The only thing that would change was they would go from a breakfast to a lunch menu, and then from a lunch to a dinner menu, and then but you could walk in there anytime you wanted, 24 hours a day, and get a meal. And it was just, you had a hot meal, you had fast food meal, you had anything you wanted, and they had one area where they had the local food. And I don't know if you know what a shawarma is, but the shawarmas were the best things they had there. Was where they have the big meat on a slab and it just rotates around, and they just slice it down.
Was it
It was goat. It was lamb. It was lamb, and I know it was no pork.
Probably lamb and goat, I would think. I mean, the donor.
Yeah. Yes.
How was it staying in touch with your family while you were over there?
It was easy for me because my wife was working for the government. She was back here at Wright Pat, so I had an Audubon, which is the military phone line, in my quarters and in my office, so I could call her anytime I wanted to, or she could call me. But the time difference was the only thing that intervened with that.
Was she still working as a?
She was a civilian, a government civilian then.
No. But was
she never went back into the military.
Was she still in the stenograph field? Or?
No, she got the clearance. She became a security specialist, so she's been doing security work ever since then, in for different contractors and everything like that. And she's got all kinds of accreditations and everything, and she's still working today. She's talking about retirement now, so it's getting a little bit serious.
Oh, that's great. So how long were you in Saudi Arabia?
I was there for 3 months. Went back to, while I was in Saudi Arabia, I got selected for an assignment in Korea. So I basically went back to Wright-Patterson to process out to go to my assignment in Korea. And because I was going, and this is where I say going back to the Air Force was a real enlightenment to me. Because I was going back to a management job at base level for administration, which would entail all the administrative facilities on the base, which was like the printing, the mail, reprographics, the filing systems, all of that stuff across the whole base. So they sent me to Keesler Air Force Base for 4 weeks to go through the administrative officers course. So I went to Keesler before I went to Korea, because they wanted me to have this certification before I went. And as luck would have it, I had to stop in Hawaii for a week on the way to Korea because they wanted me to meet the people at headquarters PACAF, the Air Force command that Korea was under. So that was my welcome back to the real Air Force when I went to PACAF and saw all Air Force people, all everything like that, and told me what I was going to be doing. I went to Korea. I had 10 Koreans working for me, Korean nationals. And I had, I think, about 20 or 25 enlisted folks working for me. So, and like I say, we covered everything on the whole base. Delivered mail, picked up mail. I used to meet the Freedom Bird comes in every Thursday, bringing all the new rotations over and taking all the rotations back. So we'd have to go meet the because one of the main things my job was there as the supervisor of the administration management was the administrative people coming in. Administrative people in the Air Force are gold. People fight over them because if you have an administration position, you want to make sure it's filled, and those are the people that do all your paperwork, type your reports, file your reports, take care of your training records, make sure that everybody's in the right place at the right time, keep calendars. So it's, you know, it's an office secretary, but it's a lot more than just being a secretary. And we would have to go to the airplane on Thursday to meet that plane to get the Air Force people coming to Osan, administrators, we'd have to actually go get them by name, pull them over and say, okay, because there would be a bus from Kunsan, which was 5 hours away, and they were there recruiting administrative people coming off that airplane to go with them to Kunsan, even though they weren't supposed to go down there. So sometimes we would lose somebody to Kunsan and wouldn't find them until maybe a month or two later. So that was kind of interesting. But I enjoyed my time in Korea. Korea was really great. It was the Koreans really respect the Americans, even the younger generation. Of course, we're talking. The last time I was there, it was in '94, because I had 2 different assignments there. But I never realized how much the Koreans appreciate, and the Korean nationals that worked for me. I mean, they treated me, like I was something really special and respected me, and it was really appreciated. I never experienced that when I was in Europe. When I was in Germany, or I was visiting France, I didn't really feel like they were really happy that I was there.
Were you able to bring your family along when you went to Korea?
On my first tour, the Korean government has what they call reunion in Korea, where they basically, you pay the airfare and they'll bring a family member over for a week, and you just travel all over Korea on bus. They put you up in the hotels, and again, you don't pay for anything but the airfare for them to come over. So the first tour I was there, my 3 oldest children came over and spent the week there with me. So, I mean, and that's something that they'll never forget. And the youngest daughter, who I didn't bring over, never lets me live it down to this day that I didn't let her come.
What did you do with your children in Korea?
Well, they all stayed in my room with me because I was a chief master sergeant. There was special quarters for the senior ranks. So I had it was in a dormitory, but it was 2 rooms converted into an apartment. So I had 2 rooms. I had a kitchen. I had a bed, so the kids stayed with me in the room, got some futons, and they slept on the floor. But they were only there for a day or two. There's a big recreation facility up in Seoul at Yongsan Air Base. It's called the Dragon Hill Lodge, and at that time it was a brand new facility, and it's like a 12, 14-story hotel right in the middle of the downtown Seoul. Got a casino in it and everything like that. So we spent a night there before we went on the tour. But once we went on the tour, everything was done by the Korean government. We had translators, tour guides, every place we went, and we saw a lot of monuments and a lot of places from the war. And again, they're so proud to show you what they have and what they've done. Took us up to the DMZ, to the military zone. We went and walked into the Panmunjom, to the building there and everything. So it was, it was really, they had a good time. And of course, the main thing when you go to Korea is for shopping. So they learned how to power shop while they were there. Oh. My second tour in Korea, which was 2-3 years later, my wife came over on the same thing on the second time. So actually, she came over twice because she liked the shopping that much.
That's great. So how long were you in Korea the first time?
I was there 12 months each time. It was a 12-month unaccompanied tour.
Okay. Do you have any memories that stick out from your experience there?
In Korea? Mm-hmm. I do, specifically because I'm a Catholic, and I used to go, I'm a reader at Mass, and every place I've been overseas, I can tell you experiences on my religious side. Not religious in the sense, serious religious, but I mean what I believe and everything like that. I go to church and all of that stuff. But when I was in Korea, I forget which, it was one of the Catholic holidays. It was either Good Friday, Ash Wednesday, or something like that. I had went to the chapel for services, and one of the Korean workers that worked for me was at the Mass also. And he was surprised to see me there, and we had started, after that we started, that gave us something common to talk about. And over the next few months, he turned out to be, he was a very important Catholic layperson in the Korean Catholic community right there in Osan where I was stationed. So he'd asked me to come to his church. He took me to a Korean wedding. He took me to one of their adoration things and stuff like that because he was just so happy that there was an American that kind of believed what he believed. But all of the Koreans that worked for me, they all called themselves Christians, but they still believed in Buddha. So it was kind of, you know, there was that cross. But he was the one that was totally dedicated to being a Catholic, which the second time I was there when my wife came over, he took us out in the middle of the country to a retreat house and everything like that. So that's one of the most lasting things I remember both of my tours in Korea.
Are you still in contact with him?
Not as much as I used to. I have one person, the secretary that worked for me the first time I was there. I get an email from her once every year or so, but it's just, they were probably the best friends I've ever had on any of my assignments, you know, as far as nationals or anything like that. And I don't consider them Koreans. I consider them friends, all of them.
Was there anything more that you wanted to talk on your first tour of Korea?
Nope. Well, I went to, from Korea, I went back to Wright-Patterson to the same organization, but a different job. So I was there for about another year and a half when I got my second Korean tour. So I went to Korea for the second time, and that was in 94, 95. Same job, same 10 Koreans working for me again, all new military people, of course. So it was, I didn't get to go to Hawaii at that time because I'd already been, so they already knew me. It was still, and it was, again, like I said, we expanded on our contacts from the first time I was there with that one gentleman of mine who was a very good, I consider him a very dear friend. From Korea, I was going to try to go back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base again, but at that time, my wife's job was done away with. She was working for a joint contracting job out at Wright-Patterson, and the job was closing down, and she was an Army civilian. So they told her, well, we're not going to have a job for you at Wright-Patterson anymore. If you want to still work for us, you're going to have to go to Alabama. Well, it was, I'm trying to remember, it was up in northern Alabama someplace where the Army is. And there was no way I was going to get an Air Force assignment there because there was nothing Air Force there. I mean, the closest would have been Montgomery, Alabama, and that was hundreds of miles away. So she said, well, I can get this job in New Mexico, and I've been to New Mexico TDY to Albuquerque, and she goes, it's really a nice place. So I said, well, okay, if you can do that, I'll see if I can get an assignment to Albuquerque. And I was luckily able to swing an assignment to Albuquerque. And it was 95, and it was getting time that I was getting close to retirement, because in 96 I would have had to retire. I would hit my 30-year point, and an enlisted cannot stay on beyond 30 years like officers can. And in the military, your rank determines how long you can stay in. As an E9, I could stay in the maximum time, 30 years. As an E8, I think you can only stay to 28 years. So it goes, goes down in increments from there. So I knew I was going to be retiring, but I thought I had enough time to plan and everything. Well, when we got to Albuquerque, my wife and I realized that Albuquerque is a nice place to visit when you're not going to stay there, but when you're going to stay there and live there, and that's nothing against Albuquerque, it's just that I grew up in New Jersey, and I spent a lot of time in places where there's 4 seasons, and you can go places. You know, when I was in Belgium, it was a 3-hour drive to Paris. You know, I could be in Germany in an hour and a half. So that's what we used to travel around and do that. Well, Albuquerque, it was an hour to Santa Fe, and then it was 8 hours to any place else. So we couldn't just take off on a weekend or a holiday and just go on a jaunt or anything like that. So it wasn't as great as we thought it was going to be. So I started looking for a retirement job then. And I found a job. We both found jobs back in, I spent 30 years in the Air Force. I went to Washington, D.C. one time. My first retirement job was in the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. as a contractor. So that was a rude awakening for me. But so in other words, when I retired in 95, we went to Virginia, and that was the end of my military career. Although my 2 daughters were both in the Air Force, stationed all over the place too. They got out after 10 years and decided they wanted to be full-time moms and stuff like that. So, and again, my wife is a contractor working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I fully retired in 2011. We were in Virginia until 2001 when we came back here. Couldn't get anything in the Dayton area, but we both got jobs at Battelle over in Columbus. So I worked at Battelle in Columbus for 11 years until 2011. I retired completely, totally.
So what did you do at the Pentagon when you were there?
Again, my security clearances. I was able to get a job. All the contractors hired, they hire their employees based on where they can put them in, especially for the government. So as luck would have it, because of my clearance and my background, I wound up working in the Pentagon as a contractor for the Secretary of the Air Force for Space, which the equivalent of another a company that I wound up working for, an organization I wound up working for later was the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, which is about as high tech as you can get. So I spent, like I said, until 2001 when we came back here. And again, the jobs we got at Battelle were based because of the security clearances we had. They had those kind of jobs, and they were looking for those kind of positions with people with clearances. Because if you hire somebody without a clearance, then you got to go through all the paperwork and pay to get them that clearance, because it costs money to get a clearance. But once you got it, all you have to do is renew it every 4 or 5 years, as long as your background checks keep coming through. So, and it was almost like going back to my old days in the military, because I walked into Battelle and I was the only Air Force person out of a group of Navy people. All Navy retirees and me.
Now, for those who don't know, what is Battelle?
Well, Battelle Memorial Institute is a organization in Columbus. Goes back to around 1912, I believe, was founded. It's a philanthropic organization. Most people don't realize that, and I didn't until they were. They don't have stock, they don't have shareholders or anything like that. They put almost all of their profits back into education here in Columbus. They have metro parks, they have libraries, they sponsor all those kind of things. It's a worldwide organization, though. They're all over the world, Battelle offices and Battelle companies, and they do any kind of research you can imagine, science, and Ohio State is their feeder ground for all their engineers and everything. So, Ohio State's right across the street.
With all your experience and everything you've done, I can't even imagine what they would have had you doing.
You'll just have to keep imagining.
Play with that in my head.
But it was unique. It was very challenging, very interesting. Stuff that I never would have ever thought about when I was in the Air Force. Because again, remember I said it was all Navy people that I was working with. So.
And then, how was it adjusting back to civilian life? I mean, you've gone and done been to all these places and done all these things. How was it when you had to hang up your hat?
Well, when we came back to Ohio in 2001, I'm not going to kid you. In 2004 and 2005, our feet were itching. We're already here for 3 or 4 years. What are we going to do? Where are we going to go next? So, I think what we finally wound up doing is we moved from, we originally were living in Grove City, and we moved out to London in Madison County because my wife changed her in 2009, I think it was. She changed her job from Battelle, came back here to Wright Pat, working for contractors at Wright Pat. So London, Madison County is halfway between Dayton and Columbus, which turned out to be a perfect location because our kids all wound up back here. Our two of our daughters live in Grove City, another daughter lives in Columbus, and our son lives over in Centerville, which is over here on the Dayton side, so we're halfway between all of them. We got 3 grandkids on the Dayton side, and we got 5 grandkids on the Columbus side. So my adjustment was coming to school bus for the kids.
Yeah, jumping from Columbus to Dayton is not as far
and I enjoyed
as
every minute of it.
To Germany.
Enjoyed every minute of it. Then all the grandkids, as they grew up, got into their sports. We got our oldest granddaughter's a very good volleyball player, and she's played from high school, and she's now playing at Columbus State. So.
And then, have you remained in contact with anyone that you were in the service with?
Oh yeah, I run across people every now and then when you go, because we still travel a lot. My wife's got to go back to Hawaii at least once every 3 years or so, she says, just to put her skin in the water and wipe off all of the shark scales and everything like that. So The organization, when I was in Belgium, I told you I was working for General Haig and then for General Rogers, and part of my job there was I was the coordinator for all of the transportation they did. We had 3 helicopters, we had a C-9 aircraft, we had a Mercedes 600 sedans and everything, because the SACIR was that important a person. He was the senior military person in Europe for the U.S. and for NATO. So the airplane crew I got to come real familiar with, and they were based out of, they were actually the attachment under Air Force One. It was the same unit that does Air Force One. And this airplane was the only airplane in the Air Force other than Air Force One that didn't say United States Air Force on it. It said United States of America. But anyway, to answer your question, is those people that I interacted with there, they call themselves the SACIO reunion, and like every 2 years they have a reunion of all the people, and there was about 50 of us that worked on supporting that one airplane. So they just had a reunion last year in Kentucky, and from the old commander, the pilot of the plane. So see them on email. Email, I have a lot of contact with a lot of the people, but it's face to face, not so much.
So what were kind of the things when you went to the reunion? Just banquet?
Unfortunately, I didn't get to go.
Oh, sorry.
So, and I really missed it, but I had a little bit of illness last year that wouldn't let me go.
Oh.
But I'm looking forward to the next one.
Oh, nice. And then, are you a member of any veteran organizations?
My wife and I work for the USO. We're volunteers for the USO, and we support the Dayton Airport USO. So I work out there. I try to work out there maybe 4, 5, 6 times a month. It's a great organization, and it keeps me in with the military. Of course, I get to interact with them, talking a lot of war stories with the people coming through there. See a lot of Vietnam era vets come through there and everything like that. And it's really nice to see how everything is donated to the USO. All the food, all the drinks, all the facilities. Dayton Airport gives them the facility that they use there. It's not big, it's not small, but it's just right, and I just love it. I just love it. So that's how I'm getting, other than my hobbies of stamp collecting, and it's tax season, so that's my next big charge I got to do.
What are some of the duties you do for the USO?
The USO at Dayton is open 7 days a week from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night, and it's 3 4-hour shifts. So depending on what shift you do, and I usually do the opening shift, which is the 8 o'clock to 12 shift, and what you do is you open up the USO. You unlock all the doors, turn on all the lights, turn the TVs on, open up the kitchen, make sure, and you keep the kitchen stocked. They got a coffee machine, got a coffee maker, they got a refrigerator that's been donated, that's got all kinds of drinks and everything in it. Then you got all your snacks. They just recently put a freezer in there, so they have frozen foods, burritos, sandwiches, and stuff like that if somebody wants to come in and do something in the microwave. So, and it pretty much is all hit and miss. Whatever's there is whatever's donated.
That's great. I only have a few more questions left here for you.
Okay.
How has your military experience affected your life?
Oh, 100%. I mean, my military experience is my life. Everything I learned and did, all the interactions I had with people, if it wouldn't have been for the military, I don't know, I'd probably be sitting in the back room with a calculator or something, typing.
Be in the courthouse.
I mean, I probably may have never left New Jersey.
And then, what are some life lessons you learned from your military service?
Friendship, camaraderie, discipline more than anything else. I mean, discipline all around. That you get out of it what you put into it. I mean, it's not just a job unless you want it to be a job. There's other things to do. If you have a family, you need to have a family life. Like I say, when we're not shrinking violets. When we go someplace, we don't just stay in the one place, and that's what unfortunately a lot of the other Americans do when they go overseas. They want to have an American community, and they want to stay on the base because everybody speaks English, everything's American food, but you miss a lot of cultural stuff by not going out there. And I mean, even if you can't speak the language, you can make yourself known. And if you want to buy something, believe me, somebody will be able to sell it to you.
Learn English real quick.
Yep.
And then, how has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
That's a loaded question. I'm not a warmonger, but you know, peace doesn't come for free. That's the bottom line in my mind. And I've seen casualties, very not in conflicts, but just the normal casualties that you see in life. You know, co-workers getting killed in car accidents or accidents off. I've never, thank goodness, ever been involved in a terrorist activity. I've been near them. I was in Belgium at the time that they had the bombing at the airport where they bombed the Israeli ticket counter at the Belgian airport. I was there in Belgium at that time, but you know, wasn't involved in it. When I was in Italy, was it the first time was the height of the Red Brigade, all the terrorists going around in Italy and Germany and stuff like that. But again, you would see it on the peripheral when they would close down roads or close down cities and stuff like that. But thank goodness my family and I have never had to be involved in a terrorist activity. But I mean, I'm a Teddy Roosevelt guy. Carry a big stick.
But speak softly.
Yes.
And then, is there anything that you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
Well, I think this is a great opportunity, and I would hope a lot of veterans come forward and do this. And like I say, I'm trying to get the word out there as much as I can to as many veterans as I know, because I just think that this is something that people need to know going forward. I mean, history, the military has gone from such a large organization. I mean, you look at Congress. There's hardly any military backgrounds in Congress anymore. Although now, after it's starting to, some of the Afghan and Iraqi veterans seem to be getting elected here and there, but I don't know. People just don't understand the military.
Kind of one of those things where you don't know unless you go.
Exactly.
And then I just got one further question for you. What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view this interview?
That's a tough one. Don't be afraid to explore. Don't be afraid to try something new. Everything's different out there, and there's different strokes for different folks. That's about the best I could put it, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. Well, this concludes our interview. I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your day to do this interview. I'd like to thank you for your service.
Thank you, and I'm glad to have done this. Thank you for doing this.